Okay. So, welcome everybody. I'm going to present Vidiella, Dr. Vidiella, who has been participating in the Ramon Margalef Symposium. Thank you, Blai, for your engagement throughout all the course. And so Blai is a postdoctoral researcher at the CNRS in France. His research is focused in theoretical ecology, synthetic biology, and applied mathematics. He is currently affiliated with the Station d'Écologie Théorique et Expérimentale, in particular in the José Montoya Laboratory, that's in the middle of France. And he will be talking about some of his research doing his PhD. He performed his PhD at IBE, focused on the terraforming Earth ecosystems, engineering ecosystems to prevent anthropogenic tipping points. His doctoral research proposed using synthetic biology to modify microbiology genomes to restore balance in integrated ecosystems such as deserts and oceans. And his research, he received several awards for his PhD, such as the Mejor PhD award from the CSIC, and among others.
Yeah.
And so the floor is yours, Blai.
Thanks. Well, first of all, thanks to the organizing committee of Ramon Margalef, because it has been a pleasure to be here the whole week. And even more, to giving me the possibility to speak to the whole community today. And today I will present some of the results during my thesis. But given that we are in this Ramon Margalef summer colloquia, I will also give a little bit of a broader spectrum, let's say, of the bioengineering, the biosphere topic, referring to more research that I have been doing, and it's really related with the topics that we have been talking about during this week. First of all, well, this is my opinion and came from my experience. And my self-conception of myself, it's that I am a complex systems scientist. I'm a person who likes to talk with other persons and to learn from different disciplines and try to bridge between people doing really specific things in their area to broader spectrum. Especially, we can see here the diagram where humans, we are part of the drivers of the ecosystem and the environment and how everything runs. And for this reason, I am learning from the past. With Sergi, we collaborate with paleontologists, anthropologists, and geologists, and try to do models and predictive theory to understand what is currently happening and what will be the future of our biosphere. When I was a kid, I had an illness that led me at home during almost 2 years, and most of the time what I was doing is to see these beautiful documentaries, and this gave me the passion for ecology and biology. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a terrestrial ecology. Okay. But as I grew up, I see that things were changing. Nowadays, we have power. As humanity, we can change everything. And nowadays, our decisions have been to let ecosystems suffer from our behavior. Well, as you can see, it's a complete disaster. If we read a lot of books, a lot of theories, a lot of data, it's telling us that we are pushing ecosystems toward their boundaries. We are suffering things that, from the scientific point of view, haven't had to be reached in a long period of time, and we are facing even the possibility of the extinction, meaning that we can have the power that in the previous eras have been taken by volcanoes or by long periods of time of oxidation and all these kind of things. And how we reach this power. Okay, this is, well, I cannot go backwards, sorry. how we reach this power. Okay, as you can see here, this is current population growth. All the things that give us the power to be sustained in that planet, it's taking resources, metabolizing, let's say, and letting detritus or whatever in the environment. Everything follows the same trend as human populations. We can see how the CO2 in the atmosphere is becoming exponentially accumulated. We can see how ocean ecosystems are being exploited by fishing. We can see how biodiversity is dropping also. Well, a lot of disasters. And in particular, nowadays, humans have made as mass as the complete biosphere. Some of the estimations give us that just plastic weight more than the whole animal kingdom. All these drivers are pushing our planet to conditions that have never been reached in the history of humanity, at least, because as we can see here, this is the Holocene. This is where we, as a society, have lived from all our history, from the beginning of the agriculture to today. If we do a zoom up, what we can see is that the temperature was stable around some values, and now we are pushing this boundary so far from the original state. Now some studies say that we are reaching 1.5, well, we are quite far. And if we see the CO2, that it is one of the most monitored things, we are far away from more than 800,000 years ago. These have made us one of the powers or one of the main drivers of the planetary behavior. We are in the anthroposphere, where humans have the same possibility to change the planet as the lithosphere or the hydrosphere or the atmosphere. Meaning, for some people, that we are in the Anthropocene. An era or an event, depending on the people. Now I think that it's more an event from the geological point of view, where humans are changing dramatically the whole planet. The whole planet, I say it because this is how much we are changing all the ecosystems of our planet. We can see terrestrial ecosystems, but also marine ecosystems being hardly pushed to conditions that have never been before. This is a study from, I think that this week, where we can see that all the ecosystems of our entire planet, this is terrestrial, and I expect a similar kind of figure for marine ecosystems, are expecting conditions that have never been before, meaning that species have to move or adapt, and we are driving all these global changes. This idea of global changes is what have pushed some of the scientists to think in these planetary boundaries that for me it's in between, because they are global measurements that indicate how far we are from the tipping point of the biosphere. But if we analyze one by one all the systems, we can see that we are around these limits of the ecosystems. And some people even think about a global tipping point. They say global tipping point because it seems that we are reaching a point where all the ecosystems will eventually collapse. This, well, for the people in the audience that have been in my previous lecture, will be a little bit repetitive for 10 slides, not more. We have systems where these tipping points are really observed. These are semi-arid ecosystems, and we can see that even in satellite images, we can see that for the same environment, we can have coexistence of vegetated and non-vegetated states. Meaning that if we want this region to become the other one, if they are isolated, we will need to change a lot the conditions of that system in order to be able to recover. And this kind of tipping and critical things occur across whole scales, from small populations that we can have in the lab to social organisms to complete ecosystems, or even, well, the proposed big jump in the biosphere that can eventually occur. And when we are dealing with that, we can think, okay, well, we are nearby the tipping points. What this means? Well, this means that if we continue changing, our ecosystems will eventually collapse and we will not be able to recover, and under an assumption of effective, cost-effective thing. But also that external shocks like hunting or fishing or all this kind of stuff, or degradation, can lead our ecosystems to eventually collapse and not adapt to the new conditions. But if this is not enough, nowadays we know that there exists a ghost, meaning that when we are near the tipping point, it's really difficult to know if we are before or after the tipping point, meaning that it's really urgent to take actions, because even without changing the external conditions, we can have long periods of time where our ecosystem seems to be stable or happy or whatever in that environmental conditions, but they will eventually collapse. When we have fluctuations, this is even easier. We can go, this is the measured tipping point, this is which is the real tipping point. When fluctuations are increased, for instance in temperature, or for instance in the amount of degradation that we impose to the system, what we can reach is irreversible changes quite before the tipping point. Meaning that we have to act right now, because we do not know yet if we are before the tipping point, meaning that if we do not push the ecosystems further, they will eventually recover and we will have a healthy state, or if we are in a condition where even stopping the increase of temperature or the increase of pressures, the ecosystems will eventually collapse. And when an ecosystem or a system collapses, it's not just a matter of a local thing, that, oh, this poor country will not have forest, this poor country will not have vegetation, this poor country will not have fish. What we can observe is that tipping points are connected between them, and we can unravel a complete cascade of tipping points that will eventually make this thing of the global tipping point to occur. Then humans, having the power of doing things, until now doing bad things, we can think in many ways of trying to restore the ecosystems. Some of them have already been talking here, like transplantation. Transplantation, in this case, it's the green wall in Africa, meaning that there is a lot of effort to plant trees, to separate what is a semi-arid or quite arid area to another that should not be affected by aridity. And they want to build this barrier. We can think that in some places, we should not act until we see the collapse. But if we take into account that most of the time, maybe we are not able to see the collapse before the collapse occurring, what we proposed is what about doing interventions before the collapse? If our system is before the collapse, what we will have is a system that relaxates to the same good condition that we already have. But if not, maybe small interventions will be enough to help our ecosystem to sustain for the current increasing human pressures. And we can do it with fluctuations and everything, and we can have good approximations, at least from the theoretical point of view, of how interventions should occur depending on how far we are from the tipping point. For some people, the kind of interventions is geoengineering, meaning to put technology in the geological feedbacks that control our planet. as yesterday we saw with Roberto, there is people that is thinking in technologies to capture, for instance, CO2 or other pollutants and make them to sit in the floor. We have seen how they try to think in systems that provide alternative currents to the ocean. As you can imagine, this is absolutely unaffordable for, well, if we have to do it, I am sure that we will do it. But maybe it's better if we try to tackle the problem before we have it. And nowadays, even in the climatic scene, they are thinking in putting satellites to reflect the sun. We can have aerosols, well, a lot of things that maybe better if we do not enter here, because some of them are not as good controlled as we want. Because, for instance, in the aerosols, there are some studies that are saying that if we want to cool down again the poles, we need to change more than 10 degrees in the tropical areas, meaning that, well, we are perturbating again a lot the systems, and probably we are doing bad things. When we enter to ecological things, and I think that it's a better idea because they are able to self-grow, they can amplify the perturbation, and they can even eventually regenerate a whole ecosystem. There are some examples of rewilding that are great. For instance, when the gray wolves entered to Yellowstone because they were being hunted and eradicated from the area, what they observed is that we have an increase in the canopy of the system, but not only that, because this is easy to expect. We are putting a predator that eats the herbivores, then plants are good. But if we look at other things, what we can find is that, for instance, beavers enter to the system. This can be a little bit of contradictory if we think that we are putting a predator and we are seeing an increase in some of the herbivores, let's say, in the area. It's great to see this example, how a small perturbation, meaning including a keystone species in the ecosystem, reclutates a lot of species to make the current beautiful park that maybe in the future can be sustained. Another thing is that wolves reclutate bears, but this can be another story. When we think in, as we have been thinking in keystone species, how they behave, which we should introduce, which not, there are many topics that came to our minds. For instance, which are the traits that these species have, which ecological functions they do, or how they behave in different habitats. We have plenty of examples these days of the same species in different habitats doing different things. These make us, especially Sergey and me, to think about maybe we can generate or think in things beyond the trophic chains. This is a trophic network. This is the tools that we are currently having, but maybe we can have a way of thinking or a way of putting different systems, for instance, different habitats together to see how the wolves behave differently in different regions, changing the whole composition of a large-scale area where microhabitats are occurring. There are examples of this kind of hypergraph, this is the technical name, where the edges are not between two. We need edges between more than two species. For instance, the case of beavers and elks, both have to eat the same tree, but they cannot do it if there is no wolf, because elks overgraze the young aspen trees and beavers do not have anything to be there. If we eradicate the wolf, the whole community collapses either to one or to the other. And the other good example is kelp forest, where kelp is a resource for urchins. If we do not have the top-down control, kelp is completely eradicated by urchins, and then the rest of the system goes with them. Even in controlled systems or well-studied systems, what we can have is that part of the information is lost if we do not take into account that we do not have interactions between two species, but there are other, like the parasites, that also play a role. If we only study how plants interact with butterflies or butterflies with the parasites, we can miss a lot of the information about resilience, evolution of the system, and this is just because we are looking at a small part of the network. This was everything motivated by the study that we did with host phage, host plant, and pathogens in Madrid, where different networks were presented to us. And what happens is, this is the same region. They are really close. But only depending on the human pressure, we can see that the interactions between the plants and the viruses are completely different. Thanks to the possibility of looking at the system as a whole, not as the individual networks, we got a good estimation of what we can expect from this kind of system, meaning that if we don't have pressures, we will have a system that have a particular structure and a predictive, more or less, distribution of interactions. But when we have natural pressures like evolution, we can see that these are quite far from the neutral assumption. And also, when we have human pressures, we go down. If we do not have only the different habitats, but we have the seasonality or other drivers, we can see how the properties of these networks change also with that. And thanks to theory, we can predict what happens. For instance, what will happen if we have hotter summers or even cooler winters. And as I have seen, or I have shown, there are species that have some ecological functions. And this will not be one of my main topics today, because it's the work that I am doing now. When we entered in the discussion of what is better to protect functions or protect species, what we can observe is how the function of the total community depends on the species. And nowadays, what we know is that small changes, when the number is small of a species, can have huge changes in the total community. All these studies are done in terrestrial ecosystems, and few, for now, are done in aquatic ones. My role in the Biocean 5D project is to develop the theory to make this transportation of the knowledge from terrestrial to marine ecosystems. And why we are trying to regenerate ecosystems. Even from a selfish point of view, more diverse ecosystems have more functions, have more fluxes of energy, they have the power of capturing more CO2, for instance, than the degraded ones. Meaning that if we are degrading the ecosystems and we are pushing more CO2 to the atmosphere, we are doing twice the same thing against the climate change. Another kind of strategy is building new things. We forget about what happened before, and now we build an artificial ecosystem. This seems completely impossible. From the point of view, for me, it was really difficult to think how I can build an ecosystem from scratch, but this have already been done. This is Ascension Island, one of the islands that Darwin visited with the beagle. And there, people, because there was only a military base here, tell that this is a mount of cinder. We can see the diagrams and maps from that era, and some of the writings and speeches that have been saved from that era. And this means that people from the surrounding islands, they are really far, tell that this is an impossible to live place because there are no trees. The tallest vegetation that there is, it's one plant that is maintained by the military base, and this was impossible. Well, nowadays, what we can observe is this beautiful example of a mature forest made by plants from all over the world, because it was like an experiment to help them, the marine base, to maintain, for instance, water, because if there is no vegetation, you do not have water running enough to maintain the population of humans. This is a great example. I can be talking about it for the whole session, but I will not. This means that we have the power to change ecosystems, even really degraded ones, because this is a volcanic extinction. And thanks to knowing a little bit of the plants and a huge effort, because this is a replantation effort, we reach a vegetated island when we have a degraded one. If we enter to bioremediation, there are many things that we can do, because we know that there are a lot of unicellular organisms, for instance, that are able to degrade things. This is one of the biggest examples. When we have an oil spillover, we need to recover the healthy state of the soil, at least, if we don't think in more things. And to do that, we have to recover all this oil. Since long time ago, one of the strategies to do that is to spill over some bacteria that are able to degrade that. We can see here how, thanks to the bioremediation, we have a degradation of the oil, and eventually this could be a new ecosystem that can have its life. But this sometimes is not easy, because we need to think how organisms degrade everything, which are the pathways that we need, and this is sometimes difficult to get, or at least in a short period of time. Then, to do that, what we can use is synthetic biology. This has been proposed for several years now, but, well, there are ethical problems also, and how we deal with that thing. Then, we enter to my thesis. This is terraformation. Terraformation, the basic idea is, okay, we have plenty of systems that have plenty of microbes, that they can have amazing functions that help the whole organism and the whole ecosystem to sustain. Why we don't use these organisms and we don't think in manufactured organisms that have to be taken from different places and remove them? Well, all this kind of stuff. No? We have one of the things that seems to be difficult to degrade as plastic, but we know that now this is a new ecosystem, let's say, because places where there was no area to be attached, now there is plastic that it's on the surface of the sea, and communities are growing. We can talk about if this is good or not, but this is another thing. And thanks to our models, for instance, we can predict how many plastic particles or how much plastic we can expect to be in the surface, depending on how they attach to the plastic. If they do not attach at all, we will see the same amount of plastic as at the beginning. As we are increasing the amount of plastic that we are putting to the sea, we will see more particles. But when we have a system that become adapted to the plastic, our measures will show that there is less plastic than the amount of plastic that we have thrown. But returning to the microbes, what we can do is test what happens in different conditions. And this is the example from the other day, where a single strain of yeast can show this biostability. And the other example, it's the example that a single microbe can completely change the composition of the system from one to the other. These are great examples done by Danny and Jeff Gore, where they show that this rewilding thing that we do with big organisms, we can do it with bacteria, for instance, to make the microbe community to jump from one state to the other. And microbes are all over the place, from the, the deserts to our guts, and we can use them. Then, terraformation is the idea that we know a little bit, at least, of the composition of the microbes that there are in a system, and we can try to edit them to make their functions a little bit more. For instance, if we have cyanobacteria that produce polysaccharides, these aggregate the soil, and the aggregation of the soil makes vegetation to be more resilient to aridity. Then, if we take some cyanobacteria and improve their capability of producing extracellular matrix, we will expect to have more vegetation. This can happen in both way around. Knowing that we have this kind of bistable systems, we can have the possibility of engineering organisms from the healthy state to sustain better the conditions of the bad state, and the other way around. We can try to use microorganisms in the desert or degraded state to favor the invasion of the good state. What we expect is that modifying the genes and the behavior of single cells, we can propagate this kind of change through the whole community, meaning that the new organisms that should coexist with the other part of the metabolism of the system can help and favor that some of part of the ecosystem is beneficial. But as this will be later, but this means taking an organism from the original patch, go to the lab, and reimplantate it, having a synthetic organism that will coexist with the original one. To have in mind all these kind of things, what we did is to develop the terraformation motifs, meaning that we study how this synthetic organism coexist and make functions in the whole community. For instance, in the desert, we can try to make our populations of plants to hold better the aridity, or for instance, in the plastic thing, or pollutants, in the case of pollutants, what we can have is some organisms that degrade the bad resource, the toxic thing, and help the original community to be maintained. Another thing, it's to think in ways that I will show later, to have organisms that once the resource is not present, they die. This is a good thing, because once the function that we need to be performed it's already occurring, we can delete the organism and let the ecosystem to become the good state. But we have, most of the time, what we observe is that this kind of function and die and degradation of things, what occur, it's that it's slow, the transitions are smooth, meaning that we cannot have a fast recovery of the system. For this reason, we entered in what we say cooperation feedbacks, where our synthetic organism, for instance, do some metabolites for the host, making the host more resilient to the depletion of these metabolites. Or we can have indirect effects, where, for instance, in the case of producing some extracellular matrix, we will retain more water, and retaining more water means favoring the growth of these organisms, or the host planet or organisms. This also can make our transitions to change, going from smooth transitions to catastrophic ones. This is not a problem, because this means that for the same values of degradation, we can have better conditions from the system. For instance, more vegetation. This was first proposed even more theoretically in this paper, where they show that maybe we cannot be as afar from catastrophic shift if we can manage to convert one kind of transition to the other one. We have done this kind of studies, theoretical studies, for many systems, especially in semi-arid organisms, because we could collaborate with Fernando Maestre and Miguel Verdugo. And in this kind of ecosystems, we also performed spatial examples of our simulations. These are cellular automata showing that the same results, or similar results, of changing the kind of transition and changing the point where our ecosystems collapse can be performed even if we have a little bit of improvement of the original cells in performing their functions. As I was showing the other day, when we have spatial patterns, we can measure early warning signals of the space. Then what we have shown is that doing this kind of interventions in the cooperative motifs, what we observe is that we move the tipping point from this amount to that amount. This is not this is a good result because this means that we can improve the resilience of the system, but we do not change how the behavior of the system is performing when we are around the transition, meaning that the alarm signals that we have, the warning signals that the system show us should remain equally, meaning that we can have a good monitoring of the system. Okay, the conclusions from the terraformation is that the theory shows that this could be a good option because with a good understanding of the system, we can help the ecosystem to recover. And we know that cooperative feedback loops make the ecosystem to recover faster and make the ecosystem healthier, let's say. But one of the bad results of our study was that there is a balance between competition and survival between the wild-type strains and the edited ones. Meaning, meaning that when we are changing, for instance, aridity, when we go beyond really near a small amount of degradation, our synthetic organisms disappear. And when we engineer them to be really good at holding the ecosystem, to be present there, what we achieve is that they will remain there for long periods of time, even once the vegetation is not there. This is not a good option. Then we have an exclusion problem. If we have the wild type, we don't have the synthetic, and if we have the synthetic, we don't have the wild type. This is a problem from our point of view because this makes the system to have exclusion between our engineered strains and the original ones. Okay, what we did. There are 3 strategies. This is self-organization around the boundary, meaning that we build a synthetic construct. These are genes and promoters and RBS and all this kind of stuff. This is a circuit that makes our organisms, in this case E. coli, to exhibit a long distribution of GFP. If we have a molecule that is not fluorescent protein, but a molecule that do a function, this would mean that some organisms will produce a lot of this protein, while some others will be in more or less the off state, meaning that they do not produce this protein. This is good because when we produce proteins, what we have is that the cells are really busy doing our stuff and do not perform equally to the wild type in the growing phase, meaning that our cells grow a little bit slower. When they have to compete, if the cells are producing too much, our system will degrade our synthetic organisms, and we will not have the function that we are designing. But with this kind of situation, we will have some cells that will suffer from exclusion, but some others, a huge variety of them, will be in between, meaning that they can hold our functions even if these functions are really costly. The other thing is to share these cost functions, meaning that we can engineer a little bit of the production of this molecule or the cycle that we want to perform with multiple organisms, leading to even multiple communities of organisms, making our system to hold the synthetic organisms and do not exclude the wild type. But we always enter in this phase of what will happen. We are sure that maybe we have an organism that we like, but we'll exclude the original ones, and we can have the poor situation that we end up with things that we cannot imagine. This is not usually the case, I have to say. All the studies of releasing organisms in a community already established show that the new organisms are completely excluded from the resources and eventually die. Then we need to be in this thin line between having a maintenance of our organism but not overcompeting the whole community. This can be also seen not only in bacteria and all this kind of stuff, but in the organisms that we are thinking in moving. For instance, the case of coral or all this kind of stuff. Maybe we have to design and think on which are the functions that they will do to not overcompete the rest of the community, and at least to maintain a little bit of their function that can hold in a transitory time the function of the community. To do that, we thought and we designed and tested in the synthetic models what kind of ecological firewalls we can have. For instance, what we can have is an organism that depletes some of the resources of the system. This makes the synthetic organism to be maintained in the system, but our original community will have problems. We can have degradation of toxins, meaning that if this toxin was bad for the ecosystem and our synthetic organism help to degrade this toxin, they will hold our synthetic organism more easily than if we do not think in these kind of things. In the case of degradation of plastic, for instance, our organism depend on the amount of plastic that is entering in the system, meaning that if we do not have plastic, we will not have growth in the synthetic organism. Or we can think in this toxin example, where depending on how much toxic it's been released, our organism can be in low or high numbers. Moreover, we analyzed how much the organisms can coexist between the original community and the synthetic. And we have some interesting results, as this one, meaning that if we have organisms that are not really good at growing, but the function is quite good, our ecosystem will hold them inside of the ecosystem, this kind of regions that we have here. But if we have our organism that it's too bad, we will have extinction of our synthetic, or the other way around. Okay, entering in more things that we can do, it's to think in evolution. There is people that think the organisms are already there. We have organisms that have been shown that degrade the plastic, at least in a small amount of quantities, meaning that we can take them and force them to evolve to be better doing that. This is one of the possibilities. The other possibility that have been already spoken here is to use assisted evolution, meaning that, for instance, in the case of corals, we take corals that are more resilient to the bleaching, We transplant them to the lab or to in situ facilities and heat them a little bit, making the coral to evolve, the holobiont of the coral, to evolve to higher temperatures. Once they are well established, we can release them again to the system and see what happens. The problem, for me, is that, as we have shown, there are lots of evolutive systems that what happens is that we have patterns of stasis and rapid evolution, meaning that when we have these controlled systems where temperature is rising and we can observe how the function of the organism is changing, maybe at the starting point we see huge changes in the community. But if we want to reach the good community, we will have to let the system to grow through lots of generations to reach these jumps that make these organisms to be really good. These examples are across the scales because we can have from viruses, cells. This is cancer. In cancer, this punctuated phenomena is also observed, or even ecosystems. This is a study showing that the different compartments of the ecosystems do not evolve in a smooth way. They have sharp transitions between the different compartments being developed to have the current or, well, the previous mature systems. Okay, this kind of stasis and rapid evolution and all this kind of stuff, for me, reminds a lot what is currently happening. Because we already know that we have climate change. We already know that there are ways of behaving or ways of living that are better than others if we think in a global mind. But we are not doing any of these things. These punctuated phenomena not only occur in biological systems. This is the original paper showing punctuated evolution. But in the human societies also occur. This is a beautiful example where we can observe that how big the societies are also change with time, and not in as a smooth way as we can expect. We can have these jumps between the populations. And this is a big puzzle because we know that most of the interactions in an evolutive system occur locally and it are small mutations, most of the cases, not always. And this made this theory to be completely discarded for many years. But thanks to the collaboration with our colleagues in the anthropology world, what we have seen is that even the current societies can suffer of this. Because just with a simple model where we can have how much information people have and how good are they in taking individual decisions or in sharing and comparing their decisions with the others, we can have the whole kind of evolutive tempos and modes. Meaning that for no information and low sharing of the decisions, we will have random drift. There is no selection for this system. If we increase the amount of information, people will start to get the new things that, and new technologies and new ways of living that are occurring. But what happens if we increase the social axis? We enter in some of the new technologies will not be absorbed by the system because they remain to the previous ones. They are completely safe, they are happy with maintaining their technologies or their way of doing the things if the new thing it's not that good. But eventually, population will jump to a new technology. But if we increase a little bit further this sociality axis, what we have is a stasis. We cannot change the system, meaning that the system became frozen in time and none of the new technologies will be adopted or the ways of doing the things. in this situation, social media, as you can imagine, are pushing our system to be more social, more biased by the other's population decisions, and making us to suffer of these slow taking decisions that maybe they are not enough. If the climate is changing so fast that we cannot tackle this velocity, we will probably suffer a lot. And it's in our hands because we have the power of changing the complete planet, as I have shown previously in the wrong direction. Maybe now we can do it in the good direction, or we will stay looking how our planet burns down and the biosphere it's melting. My decision, it's try to do things. Thanks to all my collaborators and every people that have made this possible.
Well, thank you so much, Blai. Now we will go through the round of questions. Please, if we can do the questions in English. There's some people in the audience who don't speak Catalan or Spanish.
Very inspiring presentation. I really liked it. Even if you said, as you said, that you would repeat some of the concepts that you already dealt with during the colloquia. I had two questions, not related to each other. So the first one is, did you manage to do any small-scale experiment to validate your simulations, like for the terraformation part of your PhD work? And the second question is, how is this punctuated evolution measured? Like, is it a genetic distance or what?
Okay, great. The first one, the answer is not. We, well, Ricard especially, asked for a lot of times for funding to have the possibility of doing small experiments in the lab, simple things. We know how to do synthetic organisms. We did, as I have shown, but we need money to test things. And the problem was that none of the funding agencies give the money to do that. And to my best knowledge now, Ricard have got a partnership with EMBL to have a little bit of funding to test some of the concepts. Because, well, they are trying, for instance, to maintain the semi-arid ecosystem controlled, to have this possibility of doing interventions and all these kind of things. But in the time of my thesis, this was not a possibility, and probably in the future would be great to test them. And the second question was regarding punctuated. Punctuated evolution can be shown in all the scales. This is Hamming distance, meaning that yes, you can see the distance between the genetic of the population, let's say, but it's also seen in bigger properties, in a broader scale, like cell size or how effective they are in infecting, or all these kind of things that do not depend only of one gene or one special mutation. But the good thing is that in our paper there are lots of examples where we show that we go from molecules to ecosystems, and we can find some parallelisms on how these punctuated emerge and where they emerge.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you. It was really, really nice, and also I think very useful, all this data, if you want to work in this. I have two questions. The first is, how stable are the edited genes in the environment? And how do you know that they will be expressed? Also, that they will code for the certain enzyme that you want? Because I will give you an example. I was working with bacteria that have enzyme that reduces nitrous oxide. and we taken it from the soil, and then we wanted to put it in the soil, where there was a problem with the media optimization, of course, because they don't grow that well. So here synthetic biology is it's a good solution. But the thing was that the enzyme was expressed only in a certain pH conditions, and they changed. And also like in soil, you have a lot of organisms, and they have quorum sensing activities, and so like all these questions that I have, how to adapt to this.
Completely.
problems.
In fact, this was the origin of thinking in the relationship with the environment, let's say, or the other organisms, because even in our simulations, what we have shown is that even if the mutation or the loss of the material, the genetic material that we edited is low, we can have huge exclusion effects when our synthetic is not really good at growing. And for us, these kind of examples are the ones that we needed to develop all this theory. Because at the end, it's what you were saying. You have the wild type unedited or the one that you evolved or whatever. But they are usually really good in doing their functions, and you're perturbing them, meaning that they will not be that good in that environment and everything. And for this reason, we thought in this strategy of complexifying a little bit their behavior. For instance, well, in the case of soil, it's a little bit tricky. We can talk later, but yeah, because you have a lot of forces and erosion and everything. And the other possibility is to do this kind of hyperloops where you have more organisms that do the same function and help between them. And at least what we show is that in a temporal scale, you can have a transient phenomena where your community is better than the original one in maintaining the function until, well, maybe there is seasonality or whatever that can eventually drop out your system. Because this is really good if you think that they are all present, but when one becomes extinct for any reason, you lose the loop and you're out.
Question would be what kind of so you said you work with the dryland, and what kind of how to say, like or bacteria or certain genes would you like there? So I don't know if you understand, but what would help the drylands?
Well, in fact,
what kind of advantage? Or
part of the reasoning behind, I don't know if part of the reasoning behind this was made in collaboration with Fernando and Miguel Verdugo, that they work in drylands. And we were really happy because they thought in some of the cyanobacteria, because they are autotrophs, they are in the base of everything, and maybe they are the most targeting ones. At the same time, we know that the genetic tools are not as developed as in other organisms because they are more difficult to edit. Then, to my best knowledge, we should target autotrophs, but this happens for all the systems. We need more information to know better which ones will be better. Because, well, there are these examples of people amplifying some of the cyanobacteria of the soil in the desert and releasing them in high quantities. And they show that the abundance of that species, it's like absorbed by the system in months, meaning that this perturbation that maybe was good from my point of view, of having more extracellular matrix, more productivity and everything, the whole system controls the population and goes down. And this was also one of the thoughts that make us think in going beyond just releasing things, but editing and maybe helping them in some ways.
Thank you.
More questions?
Thanks. Thanks for the talk. I was thinking, so you have a lot of examples that are already coming from terrestrial environments, and of course we are a marine research institute. So how can you include somehow the high rate of dispersal and dispersion that is occurring in aquatic ecosystems, and yeah, to consider this in well, your work in general, because if we include a synthetic organism into an aquatic ecosystem, basically in an hour your population is going to be diluted. So
well, it depends. No, we can try. Okay, we can try to edit the microbiome that is inside of some of the at least famous alluvions. We can have sponges. We can have a lot of organisms that live in the benthic zone that are already stuck in a place, and maybe they are good. And in principle, this could be even better because we can define an interior and exterior habitat, let's say, for your synthetic community, meaning that it would be even easier to find an ecological interaction that hold the synthetic inside and not having a spill out of our synthetics and doing their functions around, let's say. When I was working on that, in fact, the paper was not done and not even published. But I was thinking even in how we can have organisms, microorganisms from different species that can cope to do that kind of functions. For instance, reducing the amount of CO2 that is being absorbed, or all these kind of things. For instance, we have a squid, or we have a lot of organisms that have an interior and have an exterior part, and we can edit the organisms inside. I think that it would be a good starting point. And for me, it would be great because when we think in terrestrial ecosystems, they seem to be easier. They are easier to measure, they are easier to maintain. But even when you go to the microbiome, let's say, of the soil, it's not that easy. Meaning that maybe from the different disciplines, it seems that the other field is greener, let's say. But both areas have different problematics. But in terms of containment, I think that maybe in the sea it's better because, well, we know that there is all this huge trophic interaction in the open ocean where microbes do not select that much what they eat, but they do in size, meaning that maybe our organisms can be degraded easily when they are outside of the alluvion. Well, there are lots of this process that can be thought when you are tackling the problem from the sea.
great.
Thank you very much for your talk. Very interesting. Two questions regarding the cultural model of transmission, of evolution, and these two crosses.
Yeah.
In your model, have you tried to take into account if there is a hierarchical structure of this evolution, in the sense that the social part, what you said about social media, in fact, our knowledge is structured and it's imposed partially, no? And therefore, have you tried to do something in this analysis? And the second question would be regarding the do not harm, the conservation or the intervention and terraformation. Do you rank these approaches to our problem? In the sense that what I feel is when I hear this is that I'm worried, no? Because if you go to Europe and you talk about that, maybe it can increase this Promethean optimism. That how do you relate to that since you work on this specific topic? It would be interesting to know.
Yeah. I will answer that. Regarding the structure of the population here, it was all shared the information with all. And now we are working on this network thinking because some of our colleagues have detected these poles of opinion, let's say, in the social media that are really strong. And once you detect that, you think, well, maybe we can incorporate that. But my expectation is that this transition goes below, meaning that it would be easier for the population to take actions having the effect of the community. Because when you have a structured population, it's more easy to transmit the information and the misinformation, especially through the whole chain. And regarding of ranking, for me, I have to admit that I am more ethically calm, let's say, with the other trials of interventions. But my opinion is that at least we have to have the knowledge and the trials in the labs and all the development to have terraformation or synthetic interventions or bioengineering as a tool, because maybe, as it has been shown, depending on the system and depending on the intervention that you want, with natural or more natural kinds of intervention, you will not reach your objective. Even more if we are in this situation where temperature increase, human drivers are increasing, meaning that what we want to impose the system to behave, maybe it's not holdable for the newest conditions, let's say. Meaning that we, in my opinion, we can start by passive restoration, maybe later go with some macrofauna or whatever that can help us, maybe replantation or depending on the system, it's great. But if all these techniques fail, and if we do not stop our drivers and everything, I think that at least we need to have the knowledge and the tools in the lab to try to have a final intervention, let's say.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I was wondering whether your model considers the horizontal gene transfer between the synthetic and the wild type communities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, it is not published again, but one of the strategies that were thought is even to increase this horizontal gene transfer in the case of the need of having a rapid spreading of this intervention. Because at the end, when we are thinking in the intervention, we think in a small amount, let's say, of organisms that we deploy in the ecosystem, and these organisms do the function. We know that when we are in microbes, some of the material can be shared between the other species, and this is worrying when we think in containment of the intervention. But at the same time, if we need to do a rapid intervention, a disparate, let's say, trial, we probably will need to increase this horizontal gene transfer to help or to increase the function of the whole community at the point that we can. But yeah, we target this in our mental thoughts or mental exercises because we don't have the experiments. But yeah, this is one of the tools that we try to think about it.
Related with that, with this topic you were talking about, I mean, you say sediment soils are complicated, but I must say, you know, marine allobionts are not simple at all, and they are very, very selective on what microbes they get from the water, related with that. So then why not create your little, you know, robots there and just give the fauna alone, you know? I mean, create the full thing by itself.
the big issue is the scalability. Robots are costly, their production is limited, and they can fail. Let's say they broke down. The good part of doing this kind of interventions, or at least what we were planning in our minds, is that biological agents grow exponentially in the best of the of the cases, meaning that you can have a lot of these small machines, let's say, in a short period of time. They can adapt, and robots not, if the conditions are changing and the genetic material that they have allow, they can adapt to different situations, and they self-repair because they are alive. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for the talk, very interesting. I think that the research that you guys are doing is very interesting in complex biology for informing complex systems in which the systems are a subset of them. No?
Mm-hmm.
So this brings a lot of interesting and new knowledge. That's very good. But then, on the other hand, I think that you should have also a social responsibility in the sense that giving the message of like science or engineering or whatever can solve the current problems is not the good way to go. No? Because
I
you can
completely agree with you.
you can give the wrong impression. No.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that we as a scientists need to consider is whether the destiny of the Homo sapiens is self-destruction. This could be a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And if so, of course, if we self-destroy, then the planet will go on and probably better happy without us, no? But I think that one of the things that should be done is like saying, look, science cannot solve anything, and the only thing that we can do is like really make sure that we send the alarm signals to try to avoid, if possible, because maybe we have to contemplate that this is our destiny as a species. No? Just to remember, 5 years ago, we were in the middle of a huge catastrophe with the COVID, and the people were saying, oh, this will change society, and now we are even worse than before.
Yeah, completely.
So I think that we should take these things into account.
I am completely agree, and in fact,
because many of the examples that you put are chips and bits to solve big problems into a small scale. No?
No, completely. And in fact, for me, this was part of the reason that I was saying this is the last bullet that we have to have in our repertoire of tools, because I think that it seems really powerful or it seems really promising, but at the same time we don't have yet, at least, neither the knowledge of the ecosystem, the knowledge of how they behave, or the possibility of doing these interventions. And I completely agree with you that the message going out from this presentation, it's not that we can solve everything, because we are not in the position of solving anything. We have, well, as I have shown, there are lots of disturbances of the systems. And the first thing is to inform everyone that we are in this situation. And yeah, for sure.
Any more questions?
Just thank you for the talk. Do you work with stakeholders? So how do you manage to, from this social behavior, from copying others, and for example, there are now presidents that say climate change does not exist. So how do you work with that?
Okay, this kind of stakeholders, it's difficult, yeah. In fact, we are collaborating with people to try to do this kind of studies, and they are really good at convincing people. What we have observed is that most of the pressures or the misinformation in the system were there even quite before we noticed that there were a change in the behavior of the population. And this is a problem because nowadays everything gets more controlled than before. All the people was usually more segregated than now. We open our phones and we have tweets, we have emails, we have news saying things. And we, as you have said, we have presidents that are misinforming the community. And in this situation, it's really difficult. What I can say is that maybe in the horizontal axis, let's say, we cannot do that much, but maybe we should try to give more information to the society and try to give more, I would not say lectures, but more discussions with the communities and help them to take the information and have a criticism over what they are receiving, probably. But it's really difficult, I have to admit. I have the experience of talking with people working on fields and showing not all this, of course, because it's always a little bit afraid, and I am, as I was telling, will not put 100% of my expectancies on doing this. I would like first to have a change of the people, and if we don't reach the situation of we can recover from them, then use all the other strategies. But for me, it was a big experience because they tell me, no, you are showing that everything is bad, but I am here every day looking at my field, and I have seen how there are less insects, how I use more products to hold the production, how I need more installations, for instance, of water to hold it. And sometimes I feel that maybe I am far from some of the people that have facing this kind of phenomena. But there is people that it's really alarm and warning about all this, even in the social communities, let's say.
Okay. Any more questions?
No, just to comment, following the Frances comment, that somehow we make some, editing in agriculture, and the objective was to solve the problem of food availability. But this was not true because, yes, we solve the problem for some ones that they already have not so much problem. And the ones that have problem, maybe they have more. Mm-hmm. So this is not science doesn't solve everything. We have to put the social thing here and ethical things.
Completely.
Well, I have a question. Okay, do you think that in some countries that they're, let's say that they don't take all the measures to see the potential impact of this, are we going to see this being applied in the recent future?
Terraforming, you mean? Or,
I don't know,
or interventions?
Interventions such as, I don't know, like deserts are advancing at a fast rate, for instance, in China.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing a great deal to stop this desert. They're spending lots of resources. Do you think that anytime soon, perhaps, maybe China, somewhere else, we will see this sort of application?
Oh, for sure. I think, well, in the case of China, what is occurring is that they do interventions in the biggest scale that we have seen in our planet in terms of climate change and trying to slow down everything. In the case of semi-arid ecosystems, what they have built is a mesh of stripes that cover a great proportion of the whole desert, making a really interesting thing that now the sand of the desert is not moving. Just with that, nowadays, more than 10 years after the first kind of interventions, what they are looking and what they have shown is that there is vegetation holding the whole patch, meaning that once we stop the physical aggression, let's say, that this ecosystem had, now the vegetation is recovering, and in the future, probably the mesh of stripes and vegetation that they did will not be necessary because they have the original plants growing there. I mean, there is people that is trying to use all this biological knowledge to really tackle the big problems. And the case of China, it came from the problem that they had, that the dust from the desert arrived to the population, and population cannot breathe because of air pollution and all this kind of stuff. And they also had the problem that they wanted to build trains through the desert, and they cannot. And joining both problematics give the solution of, okay, let's freeze the desert and let's see what happens. And nowadays we know that this kind of intervention works quite good.
Thank you. Okay, I think that if there's no more questions, we conclude the session. And thank you. Thank you, Brian.